So Brian, is this where you want me to start, or
Yes.
is there any introduction
Well,
that you want to go to? Or?
Well, as is our habit, we typically have an informal host. And for this meeting of peer-to-peer, we have Mark Seedham from University of New Hampshire. Mark, I know here in Maryland, it's very, cold front came through. It must be pretty cool up there in New Hampshire. So why don't you just start off and telling us what's going on in New Hampshire, and we can engage in some dialogue, both with what's happening with COVID-19, because I've been reading some Twitters, you guys have a very low positivity rate, and what's happening with your incubation at New Hampshire.
Sure. Yeah, so it's good to see some familiar faces. Greg, I saw you jumped in. For those of you that don't know, Greg was helping us up here as we were trying to get our community of innovation off the ground, which stopped at or around March 13th, as society shut down our plans for that. But yeah, I know it. I'll get to that on the back end of things. So yeah, so Brian asked me a couple days ago to just walk everybody through what we're doing here. So if you're not on the Twitter or on LinkedIn aggressively, you may not know what UNH is doing. So yeah, and I apologize for the James Bond view of me. I can't. It's very bright behind me, and I can't quite get the screen. Maybe that's a little bit better. So we all suffered the same thing, right? The economy hit the bricks when COVID started. And I think very quickly, all of our communities were faced with the issue of how do we respond to this? And somewhat surprisingly, UNH decided to reply very aggressively to that. So we made a commitment around the beginning of or the middle of May that we were going to build a captive COVID testing lab. And to put that in context, we do not have a school of pharmacy. We do not have a school of medicine. We do not have a veterinary school. We did not have a diagnostic lab of any kind. So it was a greenfield start. And some of you know my background, but I used to run a biotech company that was a spin out of UNC Chapel Hill. And so when my boss, the VPR, said, does anyone know how to run a lab? Mine was the only hand to go up. And so she said, great, let's build a lab. So we spent the summer aggressively figuring out how to exactly do that. Again, we didn't have a background on this. We do have a Center of Genome Sciences, so we have the technical capacity to understand what to do. So our Genome Center provided the scientific discipline to, they gave us the underpinning to figure out what to do. We committed early on to two things that turned out to be really important for us. One was we aggressively bought supplies. So we were buying hundreds of thousands of pipette tips, hundreds of thousands of RT-PCR reagents. In case you're curious on the technology, we are using RT-PCR. We're using the basically the diagnostic test. We're not using any of the colorimetric assays that have come up or anything like that. So we're using the gold standard test. And we just started buying everything we could. So we bought 2 test suites. They run in parallel. We got all of our orders in on time. Within 2 weeks of placing the orders, everything was on back order for 10 to 12 weeks. Our instrumentation arrived right around the middle of July. We had basically every problem you could have under the sun, from ordering biosafety cabinets that didn't arrive because the company that provides biosafety cabinets had a COVID outbreak. So they couldn't actually supply them because they shut down because they had a COVID infection in their biosafety cabinet. I have a great image that I tried to find before here to show you one of our biosafety cabinets going through the window of our health and wellness facility instead of up the stairs because it didn't actually fit. We got pretty lucky in that there was a lab, a low complexity lab that had been shut down and was slated to be renovated for offices. But since COVID, they had to cancel the renovation until the fall, and then so we just moved in. So we got kind of lucky there. And the second was that we made, from a scientific view, we recognized that pooling was going to be a really important strategy before the CDC acknowledged that pooling was going to be a strategy. And so we just said the only way we're going to screen our campus is if we pool these samples at a 4-to-1 ratio. And we just made the assumption that it would be fine, where a lot of folks were waiting to see whether that was okay or not. And so as we were getting towards launch, some of those assumptions that we made started to bear fruit. So the CDC said, yes, indeed, you can go do pooling. For those of you who don't know, this Francis Collins himself basically said, if you're a university and you're doing surveillance testing, do whatever you need to do. We are not going to get in your way. So I think a lot of institutions actually hesitated because they were looking for clear guidance, and that clear guidance still hasn't occurred. So we just made a commitment to do it. We launched the lab on August 24th. So our joke is we went 0 to CLIA in 100 days. So it is a CLIA certified lab, again, from absolutely nothing to CLIA certification in about 100 days. We went from 0 to 4,000 tests overnight. So on Sunday we did none, and on Monday we did 4,127 samples. We delivered or installed enterprise software in about 37 days. I don't recommend that either. We're still suffering a little bit from the software implementation. But I guess the good news is, by and large, it has worked not only well, but quite possibly. And I see Laura's on the phone. I actually believe this is the best testing program, at least when we talk about results in the country. And I'm going to share my screen for 1 second and just show you some of the data. So this is our dashboard. It's updated daily. You'll see we're doing roughly 3,000 to 4,000 tests a day. At our peak, we had resulted out 30,000 tests in a single day. You see our positivity rate this is actually the highest it's been in quite a couple of weeks. So it's usually been between 0.06 and 0.1%, which is astronomical. And ironically, the biggest prevalence of infection has been our faculty and staff. So if you look down here at the positive rate by population, we've done 108,000 tests on students, and we have a 0.08% positive rate with the student body. Our faculty and staff have been a much higher rate. And so one of the lessons for us was never underestimate the power of K through 12 to help spread COVID, because as soon as Labor Day hit, this is, here's around Labor Day, and then 10 days after Labor Day, we start to see a spike, and those are mostly the student body. The other thing that we're doing that's not shown here is we're doing wastewater testing, and we probably have, at least our scientist has said in the cohort that she's involved with, the most data on wastewater testing. And so one of the benefits has been, since we have such a low prevalence rate, we're actually almost to the point where we can use wastewater sampling and tell exactly how many people are positive in a particular building. Not just, oh, it seems like a few, but this building has 2, this building has 4, which will allow us to maybe wind down some of the daily testing and do more surveillance testing of the wastewater. So we test everybody twice a week, every student twice a week. The faculty are tested 1 to 2 times a week. We have 10 Dropbox locations around campus where the students can drop off at their discretion. One of the hardest things we've had to do is find a driver who wants to drive in circles every day, and to have somebody in a van literally willing to go and just pick up all of those locations. But and up here you can see the isolation and quarantine. We basically have onesie twosies. We pick up a sample every day, every couple of days. These samples here in the 23rd and 24th, those are all faculty and staff. 0, 1, 2 is what we see from the student body. So, obviously we're really proud of that. It is among, I know Illinois does more testing, but I think we're among the most aggressive testing protocols in the United States. And what we've seen up here, and recognizing that the prevalence up in New Hampshire is obviously not the same as it is in places with higher populations. But what we've seen is the ability through culture to help reduce the prevalence rate. So our students are walking around every day with these little bags that they're dropping off in all of these locations around campus, and it has become a thing that they do. And the biggest surprise that we've seen in committing to a super aggressive testing protocol for the campus is that the student body, by and large, has taken on the culture of compliance. So we did have a fraternity. I hate to say, of course, but of course, that we had a little spike. There were 10 or 12 people, and they posted a video, and 99% of the comments were, "You idiots, you're ruining my semester. You can't be the reason I want out." It was not what you normally see about people having fun. They were basically shamed. And so that has been really surprising, because you would expect there to be a little fatigue, but we've actually seen it be a little bit of a self-healing program. So, that's the big picture stuff. The part that, and I've had a bunch of conversations in higher ed over the last couple of weeks because this is getting noticed. There's nothing that we do that anyone else can't do. We're doing 20,000. We have a student body of about 14,000. All you need to do is, it scales linearly. It was way cheaper than you think it was. So our total cost to start, basically to launch, and that was having bought basically supplies for the entire semester, including all the reagents, was a shade over $5 million. And that includes all the labor costs. So I don't want to say $5 million is affordable, but I would say if you ask somebody what it would cost to bring something up like this, you would not think that $5 million was the answer. So I've seen estimates from other institutions, 30, 40, $50 million, and it just doesn't cost that much. The key is the pooling and the ability to staff it. So that's what we're doing. So I figured I'd just sort of lay that out, and then we can talk about specifics there. And ironically, and I'll pause, and then we'll maybe talk about this at the back end. So Carol and some of the AURP folks have been up here trying to help us get our innovation district up. Dave has helped me. Greg Napier obviously helped me. And the irony was, basically COVID killed the innovation district for obvious reasons, because it was, we're a cash-strapped university in good times. This may actually be the thing that starts the innovation district on the other side. And I'll tell that story after we have time for Q&A.
It's really prevalent, Mark. Hi, Mark, by the way. Sorry for being late, but it's really prevalent how innovation is going to bring us all out of this. So I think you're right. I think leaning into innovation and the new district that you're developing is almost the right time. Hopefully accelerates it, right?
It might.
So Mark, that's a pretty amazing story. If you hadn't been there, given your background, do you think New Hampshire would have done it the same way, or it sounds like you provide a lot of leadership in getting this thing launched, given your background in the biological sciences?
That's hard to say, because there are definitely things that I knew how to do that I don't think we had here. But my boss, who used to work at NC State, that's a liaison here, Marion McCord, who used to, I think, run the College of Textiles down there. The commitment from the university was, if we're going to do it, it needs to be world class. And if it can't be world class, we won't do it. So I think there was this, if any of you have been involved in a startup, if you knew how hard it was on the other side, you'd never do it. But when you're in the middle of it, you just keep going to the next thing you need to do, and the next thing you need to do, and the next thing you need to do. So I think some of it was good fortune. We have incredible IT support that allowed us to do some stuff that I didn't think we'd be able to do. But the leadership of the institution was committed to making it happen. But let's not kid ourselves. There's a little serendipity involved, because if I hadn't run a biotech company, I wouldn't know how to build a lab for the second time if I hadn't built one the first time.
Yeah, well, let's open up to questions, observations from other universities. Who wants to jump in?
Who wants to build one? It's really fun.
How residential is your campus? I mean, you have a pretty amazing low positivity rate among your students. most of your students residential on campus, or?
About 50, I think it's 50, 55% are on campus. We have a pretty low commuter population, which I also think helps. But the other, actually I skipped over this part. Before we populated the campus, everybody had to do a pre-arrival screen. And then when people arrived on campus, they did another arrival screen. So basically 8 days out, they had to show proof that they didn't have COVID. And then when they arrived, they were given another test by a third party. So we had, we hope they showed up clean. And then when they showed up, we retested them to make sure they were clean. And that allowed us to, for lack of a better way to put it, scrub the campus. So we didn't have 30 people on campus who were positive, but nobody knew. So we started pretty damn close to zero. And that gave us a good jump off point too. We're also doing a self kit, like Illinois has the saliva based test. We are going with a nasal swab, but we filed an EUA on our own test kit. So the students sample themselves, and we've done validation studies to show it's just as good as a nasopharyngeal swab. In fact, our positivity rate, which is really obviously very low, we have 100% conformance from a self-test to a diagnostic test. So anytime somebody looks like they're going to be positive, we bring them back in and do a diagnostic test. And it's basically perfect so far.
So Mark, I'm assuming that you repurposed people across campus to, pick up the samples, process the samples.
All
you
new
hired
hires.
2 people?
Every single person's new except our scientific director, who's the head of our genome center. And
Wow.
we definitely repurposed people in the middle. Like, obviously I don't do this for a living. I run innovation for the university, but now I'm running the lab. And so I would say there were probably 10 or 12 people who had analogous roles who were asked to jump in. But the lab we populated, there is no one working in the lab who used to work at UNH. They were all brand new hires, all new trainees. We set land speed records. I tripled the size of my staff in 15 days, and we hired something like 35 people, part-time, full-time, to run things out. But no, we're not, like, that was part in the beginning where I said, we don't have this capacity that we just said, this lab is now this. It's all greenfield from the jump.
Anyone else want to jump in? Well, so Mark, turn a little bit to the incubator innovation piece. I mean, obviously COVID stopped that. And it may help restart it. Tell us, not everyone has visited the campus. What's going to be there? Is it going to be an incubator, or is it going to be more of a innovation district?
Not everyone's familiar with UNH. I'm shocked. It's the prettiest place to be right now, I'll tell you that. And the lobster is way better. So so it was designed. The original incarnation was an innovation district. So 60 acres it's really 50 acres, just about a half mile off campus. So literally on the next piece of contiguous land from campus. And actually it's probably 3 or 4 years from now, Carol, but when we had the AURP leadership come and help us do some socialization, it was actually your group that said we had identified a bigger parcel of land that was a little farther out, and everybody said, no, if you can do it, put it on the closer piece, even though it's smaller. And that turned out to be a pretty good decision, because it helped us in a bunch of different areas. So it is meant to be something that gets built out 1 million square feet over 10 or 15 years. We originally were starting to go with an incubator, the same thing everybody does, an incubator, accelerator, a place to do startups. That was met with some skepticism by our system, who just doesn't believe, I think, that New Hampshire is a place where these things happen, even though it's a place with 2.3% unemployment pre-COVID and a lot of biotech companies. It's just they don't know who they are, so they don't necessarily think we know who they are. So the irony of this whole thing was we basically built a startup. It just happened to be a testing lab. We just built a clinical laboratory in startup mode at startup speed, and the university had no choice but to invest in it. And so they gave us $5 million, and we gave them $600 million in operating revenue since we're open completely. So there is no half open camp, like we're open. If I could lift this, you would see students moving back and forth. Compliance is over 97% in testing. Mask compliance is basically, you don't see anybody who's not wearing a mask. So we sort of inadvertently proved that we could do hard things in a very short period of time. And so the irony of this all is we're already talking about expansion because there's some state money that will go unspent, and we're the best people to spend it because we want to spend it. And there are obviously some federal programs out there. So we're looking at increasing capacity by 4 or 5-fold and testing the entire state. And so we're looking at, because New Hampshire only has 1.3 million people, with 3 more test suites, we could test all of K through 12. With 5, we could test, with 4, we could test all of K through 12 and all extended care facilities in the state. And with 5, we could actually provide first responders, teachers, and basically as needed testing for the entire state. And the pitch will be that we'll be the safest state in the country because you can get a test anytime you need to, and we'll hire, we'll sign companies up to do testing. So again, the irony is, of course, you can't do that inside a university. You need to do it. You need to shelter the liability of this, since it's not like doing research where there's no one's going to die for the, if the research doesn't go well, no one's going to die. If you get a bad COVID test, you could be subject to a lawsuit if somebody dies. So we just had the conversation about starting the research foundation for the specific purpose of moving the COVID lab into a shelf, basically put it in a box as an affiliate of the university. And the only way we can do that is to start our research foundation. And the only way we can do that is to partner with industry. And we then want to build a building because we want to have capacity, not for 20,000 samples a week, but 200,000 samples a week. So it might have actually been quicker for us to go this route than it was to go in the other route. So I actually think in 3 to 4 months, we will have the research foundation up and running, and we'll be talking about constructing buildings to house this regional capacity. We already have a local company that's interested in providing the front end acquisition of all the samples.
Great, very interesting.
So Greg, I might call you back. I basically hung up on Greg in March and haven't talked to him since. Like, bye COVID, and left.
I'm ready.
Well, that's exciting.
A little bit away. I'm sorry to jump in. Sorry, Brian.
Go ahead, Carolyn. No.
Moving a little bit away from the sort of technical side of it, what have you done on the PR side? Obviously at U of Arizona, President Robbins, our president, has been really, really public nationally on what we're going through as a campus and what areas we're leading on. On the PR and communication side, how have you capitalized on this?
So we, I don't think, I didn't send it. So we, if you follow me on LinkedIn, we've gotten a lot of positive press. So we just there was a little 2-minute clip on our state's major news station with Senator Shaheen. So we have, as a small state, we know our elected representatives better than most. I was in North Carolina for 20 years, and I don't think I ever met even a House rep. But here we know the senators by their first names, and they know us. And so when we give them something good to talk about, they like to come and talk about it. So we've been quite a bit on the news. And it really has even been able to help us with our state legislature, which, higher ed and their relationship with their state legislatures is always, usually it's okay, occasionally it's not okay. But in showing them how the university led this, it has really fundamentally changed the way that we're viewed in the state legislature. More than most, New Hampshire, UNH is viewed as a burden to our state. We're the worst funded university in the United States by orders of magnitude below Puerto Rico and Guam at last I checked. So when you say we don't have any money, just call me and you'll feel wealthy. And so this is actually, we've had people from the legislature say this has changed the way I view the university. And so we're hoping that as we go back and ask for matching funds and ask for additional resources, that really just the activity of trying has been really helpful. And now that we're open for, it's one thing to start, right? But now it's 4 weeks, 5 weeks, we're open, the infection rate hasn't risen. We've been able to capture, when we see positive, we're able to take them out of circulation in about 6 hours. So anytime a student tests positive or a faculty tests positive, they're removed from, they're put in isolation or quarantine with about 6 hours from the time the sample arrives. So we just don't have community transmission. And so that's been really helpful at proving to people that we can stay safe. So here we are 5 weeks later. If you look at the student infection rate, it's basically a flat line of 2 per day. So there's a lot of confidence that we can keep this going forward.
You thought about going national with this story?
Yeah, we're trying. We're good New Englanders, so we tend to look at the tips of our shoes for a long time. But I think they're finally getting the confidence that, there are only a handful of universities that are, in our league in terms of doing what we're doing, Illinois is among them. So we don't usually put ourselves in those places because we don't, but I think they're getting a lot more confident that we should be there and we should have that conversation.
Yeah, so we actually engaged a firm to take our message national. So I don't think you can do it organically or through networking. I think you actually have to make a conscious effort. But it sounds like it's worth a national headline, Mark. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're trying. I would, however, like to get back to the view of tech transfer, but we'll see.
I vote we all wage a public relations campaign so we can get UNH in the news and North Carolina out of it.
I'll take it, Leah.
We'd like to get out of the Chronicle with this issue. And I mean, we're a study on contrast for what you're doing. Some kudos absolutely to you.
Leah, what is the story at NC State, and is it true at UNC and Duke? I mean, what's going on in North Carolina? For those of us who do not read the Chronicle every day, like I used to, but I must say I don't read it quite as often.
I would love to stay on UNH on this topic right now. I mean, y'all listen. I mean, I love to brag about NC State University, but we are not doing mass testing as Mark has described. And anyway, I don't want to belabor that. I'm sorry.
I mean, is you also have a lot of COVID in the state in general?
I'm receiving a prompt from Keisha to plead the fifth at this moment.
All right. Okay.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think we are doing better. We are doing better. But mainly in regards to, the perspective that Mark has shared with us, right? I mean, that's true leadership, for them to have put their necks out to stand up the testing process that they have, right? I mean, that's Mark has just sketched out for us something that they would not normally have been doing in their daily business. And we all need to be prompting our universities in that very same way, because it's our leaders of our universities and of our states for sure, they are under the gun. And I mean, honestly, some of them, I don't know how they keep on coming to work every day, right? Because the criticism is so heavy. And so, I mean, they need those of us around them to embolden them, to think about doing things differently, exactly in the same way that UNH did. And I'm trying not to hold it against you that you took Mary McCord from us. She is just an absolute brilliant
delight. Yes.
And so I don't have a great example at NC State to provide, and if I had it, I would bring it.
Well, we can talk about today. Carolina. They're not on the call.
I would love to talk about Carolina.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Leo, we have all of this and people are still complaining about it. So, Mark's example of only 2 cases a day, I think, we are at, I don't know, anywhere between 20 to 60 cases a day still, even though they're actively testing. They have some students who are testing up to 3 times a week. And interestingly enough, to Mark's point, it is mainly in our students. It's not, they've scaled back the faculty and graduate student testing. So the student spread is heavy. But I mean, they've certainly gotten it. Our positive, I put the dashboard in the chat. I mean, the positivity rate is still very low considering the volume of testing, et cetera, but there are still people in the community who want to know why it's not 0. So it's, you can't
Well,
win.
I'll tell you what really spoke to me about what you said, Mark, is by empowering and entrusting your students to do their own testing, that influenced the culture of what you see on your campus. And that's not the attitude that we took at NC State. And you know, not to get into all of that, but my daughter is at a small private school now. She's in her freshman year. And again, that's a contrast there. Now, they're a small population, you know, so you can do a lot of different things with a small population. But, you know, the culture there is, you know, nobody's going even walking across campus without their mask, right? And they're all holding each other accountable. Now, you know, the kind of the dark side of that is that then if you do get exposed, there can be a little bit of stigma around that, right? So we need to guard against that. But we just, you know, I see the repercussions of us not being firm about that cultural piece, and it's just not pretty.
Yeah, I would say some of the, so I have the fortunate or unfortunate role of doing most of the communication with the students when things go wrong. So not like not a bad dog kind of thing, but like samples get rejected, or they're in the wrong format, or they forgot to put a label on it, or, you know, all the different things that when you're screening the kinds of levels that we are in Illinois are, I mean, you know, shit happens, right? I've probably sent out, you know, 1,000 emails over the course of the 5 weeks, and only one of them was vaguely inappropriate in response. You know, most of the responses I get are, I am so sorry, I will do this right now, thank you so much, thank you for, I mean, they're grateful that we've made the commitment to them, and that none of us expected that. I mean, they're just lovely in terms of, and we've had kids say, like, I'll do anything you ask me to, I just want to be here, I just want to be in college. And that was not something we were counting on. We actually thought it would feel a little more like a surveillance state because we're testing so frequently, but they're, you know, they've just been delightful by and large. Now we're at the point where fatigue will set in because we're not quite halfway through. So we're in week 5 or 6 of 12 because we're like everybody, we've got a compressed semester. But we, you know, we haven't seen compliance slip. Our biggest problem is how do we communicate to them, because email doesn't work. So, you know, like anytime we've had a couple of mistakes, like labels were printed wrong or something happened, and we just can't get their attention. Because if you send them an email and say, hey, I need you to come to this building and get new things, they're like, no. And when we distribute the materials, they're happy to show up. But if we need to tap them on the shoulder and get their behavior to change, we can't do that. So we're looking at mass texting software so that we can text them individually, at least when they have their phones on. And the other thing that just an observation that I'm sure Laura's seen the same thing is every single positive test we've had has been asymptomatic. We haven't tested a single person who came in coughing and sniffling and sneezing and saying, I think I might have COVID. Every single sample was an asymptomatic person. And so because we are able to pull them out within, you know, again, 6 or 8 hours of them dropping a sample, we're basically taking them out before they can have a chance to spread to the community. So I know I won't cast aspersions on Chapel Hill, but I'll cast aspersions a little bit, is that, you know, their testing when they started was, if you feel sick and feel like you might have COVID, come over here. You know, 4 days later, they had, 500-800 cases, because by the time you feel bad, it's too late. And so that aggressive testing program, you know, does seem to just help keep people out of circulation.
Take that, Chapel Hill. Yes, I mean, to Carol's point, though, I saw something on, I think it might have been Business Insider. They're starting to rank universities as to how aggressive and how smart they're doing these things. So I think from a public relations and communication strategy, obviously, you're hoping you're going to be one of those 20 or top 20 universities that are doing these things the right way. And hopefully that's ammunition, if you're not on that list, to your administration that you can use and say, we want to be on that list. And, you know, it is interesting how that's a new ranking that 6 months ago, no one would have thought of.
Yeah.
Mark, this is Harry from the University of South Alabama. I've got a question that this is going to be hard, and I don't mean to be this way, but had there actually been real conversations as what an end game looks like for y'all?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, this is for us, this is the long game. Like I maintain when we started, we were in it for 2 years at least. And in fact, the reason that we went and invested all this money and stuck with the gold standard, I mean, there were people on campus who said, oh, an antigen test will be here. Or, you know, an easier technological solution is just around the bend. Why don't we wait for it? And my response was the same. It was, if these were my kids, I want them to have the gold standard. I don't want them to have something that's not as good as the gold standard. And when there's a new gold standard, we'll replace a more expensive test with a new gold standard. It's interesting you ask that question, Harry, because, you know, so my view, this is just me, is we'll be doing this for 2 years. I just like, I'm a biotech guy. Vaccines, even if we get, if a vaccine is approved for COVID by December, it will be mankind's singularly greatest achievement in the field of medicine, right? And it might happen, but widespread distribution is not going to happen for another year. So now what we had a conversation this morning was, okay, well, let's say we have 5 or 6 of these test suites and we can test 100,000 people and COVID then gets solved, right? What do? And the answer is, well, you just turn it into a diagnostic center of excellence that the faculty are always going to have something to do with an RT-PCR machine. And then we look at it as we could be a partner on other universities' grants where they need to do, you basically need the capacity to do testing. We can partner with hospital systems. We basically, once you have a clinical lab, there's no reason not to have a clinical lab. And you just start to change the business model a little bit and make it a little more public facing rather than internally facing. So, you know, we actually think every time when we buy something, how will we use it when we're not testing for COVID-19? And the answer better not be testing for COVID-21 or anything like that, right? It's how do we positively test for something different? In the end, I would not.
Don't even put that out in the universe, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. In the end, it would not surprise me. And part of the reason to push the research foundation and pull it out into, I don't want to say an LLC, but just into an affiliate unit, is it would not surprise me if somebody buys it. You know, in 3 years, you have that capacity and there could be a LabCorp or a Quest who needs more capacity and they just say, but can I just have it and your people? And the answer would be, I mean, maybe, why not? And Carol, I used to work at UNC and they sold their vector core facility, their gene therapy vector core to Pfizer. They just came in, Pfizer wanted it and they sold it to them.
So Mark, you have a very well-funded high-profile entrepreneur in your community. Has he been interested in what you're doing? Has he invested? I know that's probably insider information, but I'm really curious because I know that we won't have time to follow up individually. Has he been interested or?
No.
Oh, interesting.
If it doesn't emanate from his labs, he's not interested in it.
We have a couple of those too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yes, one would think by now it would have attracted the attention, but it has not.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Sorry to hear that.
Live free or die. If you ever will look at New Hampshire and are curious, just repeat live free or die 3 times like Dorothy. It will explain almost everything.
So Mark, how, I just wanted to I see Dave Winwood and I think of Autumn when I see you and Dave. Maybe everyone on this call doesn't know your role in Autumn, but I did want to make a pitch for our international conference coming up November 2nd to the 6th, 2020. So we do have a panel called the Bayh-Dole Act at 40. And we have Joe Allen, one of the architects of the Bayh-Dole Act, and a couple other folks that will be talking. So make sure you sign up for the international conference. But, the Trump administration came out with some pricing guidelines on medicines and things like that. And this is your chance to talk to this community about what Autumn's doing and things we should be aware of.
So, yeah. All right. So I'm going to, I will answer this question, but I'm going to think for a pause for a second on how I answer it. Because, so first off, yeah, for those of you that don't know, I'm the current chair of Autumn, at least for 6 months. Perhaps the worst timing ever to be the chair of an organization, but so be it. So Autumn has put out a statement on the drug pricing of remdesivir, which is the Gilead drug. If you don't know, 33 attorneys general across the country wrote a letter saying basically march-in rights, Bayh-Dole should be used in terms of making remdesivir more readily available, and really it was about price. And so Autumn, it's on our website, Autumn put out a statement on that, basically saying that the argument was factually inaccurate. So we all know, well, if you don't know, Bayh-Dole expressly was not intended to be used as price control. And how do we know that? Because Bob Dole and Birch Bayh both said that while they were alive, for as long as they were alive, that was in no way, shape, or form what they intended to use it for. It was about access. And so some of the irony that I find with remdesivir is, like, Gilead came out and said it was $3,200. And then everyone said, it's too expensive, it should be free. And so the question becomes, well, what is a reasonable price for a drug if $3,200 is still deemed as too expensive, right? That to me is for 5 doses, that seems well within reason to make sure that you don't die. If I said $3,200 or death, that seems a trade that most people will make. But the AG's argument, so what's the old joke? AG stands for aspiring governor. Right. So the real challenge in that letter is that you've got 33 people who probably want to be governors or senators in their state that are, this is an easy political win to say drug prices should be lower. Nobody's going to say drug prices should be higher. But the interesting aspect, and I am famously apolitical, and I'll try to stay that way, is that Biden's plan actually probably is a more direct attack on Bayh-Dole than the current administration's plans, because they are looking at ways to control prices. It is well within the wheelhouse, and you see letters from the Center of American Progress and these drug pricing consortia that are coming around, and they're saying, look at Bayh-Dole, look at Bayh-Dole, look at Bayh-Dole. So while you might think in higher education that a change in administrations might be desirable, as it relates to this particular issue, it's actually something that we're very, very concerned about and paying a great deal of attention to. There is actually another part of the federal code that more directly relates to drug pricing that could be used, which is called, what is it, Dave? It's like 28 CFR 1498, right? Yep, which has been used and has been used in the past and theoretically is a much more directed route at drug price control. So there is a little bit of, there's a little bit of mutually assured destruction in that it's like, don't look at Bayh-Dole, but you can't say, don't look at Bayh-Dole. That's not a response. You have to give somebody another answer, or you just sound like, well, you're just an entrenched university system that cares not one whit about the rest of the world because you just say, don't touch my toys, right? But Dave, you're in the loop on this stuff. I don't know if you have anything else.
I mean, Mark hit all the appropriate points there. And by the way, welcome to someone who's sitting in the state that is under the AG-ship of one of the 2 lead authors of the letter that you just referenced. So that makes life here really interesting politically to be an advocate. And some of you know, I spent some of my time on the Autumn board as the VP for advocacy before I was president. So I've been immersed in this sort of stuff, the march in Bayh-Dole, for 10 plus years at least. And so the 1498 approach is clearly the most appropriate one in this circumstance. It's really, though, clear that if there is a change of administration next year, that HR 3, which is basically the package of language that Mark was referring to, will be brought to the House and will probably be signed, and that will change everything in terms of what we as university tech transfer professionals have done over the last 40 years now. So there's a lot of anxiety, I think, amongst the community, or at least those in the community who are paying attention to this, because this is real. This actually could have a massive impact on the practice of tech transfer, because we're focused pretty laser-like focus right now on medication, vaccines, and pharmaceuticals. It actually applies to everything that we as universities own and license to our corporate partners. So it could be a really chilling, dampening effect on the innovation and the transfer of federally sponsored research out into industry and good practices for the whole profession.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, the last time we as all of us, university folk, were threatened by something like this, it's probably back in 2011 when AIA, the American Invents Act, was passed. And there are parts of biotech that still haven't recovered from that. I mean, the rate of firm formation and startup creation was much higher on a per effort basis pre-AIA than post, because of the uncertainty about the ownership of IP. And now you're saying, in addition to having ex partes review and post partes review, the ability, patents used to be valid unless you could prove in court that they're invalid. AIA kind of flipped that around and made it's probably likely that you'll invalidate a patent if you have enough lawyers and enough money and enough time. That was bad enough, but then this is something where somebody can reach in and say, you're just charging too much money and it should be less, and I'm going to apply this law. So why would anybody invest in early stage technology if the government can decide they really need it? And those tools exist in the federal code. I mean, GM doesn't want to make respirators, but it did for a while when the Defense Production Act got kicked in, right? There are points in time where their urgent matters require a different set of rules, and the country's used that over and over again over its history. But they're using this a little bit as it's a little bit of a red herring, and using it to say, well, it should be this way all the time, and let's use this blunt tool to address a precise issue. So yeah, I think Dave's exactly right. To me, this is going to affect everybody, because your ability to get startups funded and in your buildings and growing is going to be negatively affected if any part of this thing comes in. And I don't know, I feel like we're going to be facing this on November 4th.
Obviously, more AGs have signed this and didn't sign it. It was like 31 or 33.
33.
And talking to Joe Allen about this the other day, and I mean, the reality is, and Joe's been doing a lot of sleuthing, as you might imagine, and many of them had no idea what they'd signed. Somebody in their office who had some activist friend brought it in, and this is a good thing, it'll get prices lower. I have no idea where Jeff Landry, the AG of Louisiana, suddenly became involved or knowledgeable about drug pricing policy, Bayh-Dole, Marchin. He clearly doesn't, but somebody has got to him. And I suspect, as Mark knows this name very well, that it's Jamie Love and KEI, who's been on a personal crusade for the last 15, 20 years to inappropriately apply Marchin provisions of Bayh-Dole to drugs in particular. I mean, that's really the only thing that's been in his crosshairs. But it's kind of interesting that the activists who have got 30 plus AGs who otherwise had no interest or inkling of what this was all about, to put their names to the letter is really pretty disturbing. We have a very well organized opponent, and very well funded opponent, I suspect.
And just to, I think Mark touched on it, but Dave and Mark, so put aside the issue about declining innovation. For research parks, this can mean fewer startups, fewer tenants. I'm just trying to make sure people understand the implications of this from a specific tactical level, not the macro level of declining innovation. So comments, Dave?
No, it's just going to be harder to get investment. I mean, who's going to invest in a 10-year cycle of a biotech that's going to require $100 million when somebody at the very end can say, I like that, yoink, and pick off I mean, it just won't happen. So
Well, it's really on the investment side and not on the TTLO revenue side.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it'll just be harder. And then, if you think about the life cycle of commercialization out of universities, the rise of the research parks and the rise of tech transfer is the rise of startup companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that those startup companies rose was because private enterprise stepped away from funding translational research. So as large companies said, I don't really want to do that blue sky stuff. I'll leave it to the universities to do. And then then there was a gap. And then we all said, hey, let's start a bunch of companies. And that's the way to get over the first valley of death. And then those companies get gobbled up by industry, right? But if you're not able to start that company and you're not able to get that investment, how are you going to get to the point where that technology gets into the hands of industry? Because there will be no method to de-risk it enough to make it licensable.
Breaks the chain, in other words, at the very first link of handing it from universities to a corporate partner of any size who might be interested, because this thing is looming at the end of a 10-year development cycle, whether you stick with it as a startup company and get funded all that way, if you're fortunate. But then if your corporate partner or potential acquirer knows that, someone can just come in and say, no, it's not worth that much. They just throw all the calculations out the window. So why would they even bother to get into the game?
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. When this was brought forward,
I think that's an important distinction.
Go ahead, Brian. Is Brian frozen?
He froze, so it's
I
your
think
turn.
it's an important distinction that it's, I mean, to Carol's universities and our transfer office, that does sound self-interested, that we're worried that they're not going to the news from royalties, but rather it's really about the investment in the startup companies. That is where all of the invention happens.
Agreed. And I just, from David and Mark, I mean, do you think that when this was brought forward to our leadership group in research, innovation, and impact, it was really brought forward with caution on the pricing side versus the access. So do the TTLOs even grasp the gravity of the situation nationally?
Yeah, I think a lot of them do.
Okay.
From Autumn's perspective, we have to be really cautious about how, because no one wants to come out as against low drug prices, right? We all like mom apple pie.
That's not a good headline. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we try to talk about is risk, and anytime you enter risk into an investment portfolio, you're going to get a reduction in investment, or you're just going to have to overcome that risk. And again, like Dave said, if you're Pfizer, why would you ever license a federally funded technology if somebody can just flip a switch and take it? Why wouldn't you just do your own investment? And so it really dries up innovation overall, because they're not even the licensing will go down too. So I think we're trying.
Or does it just change the timeline that we work within? Are they going to snatch up these ideas, these concepts, these technologies earlier then?
No, because they've not funded that. It's too expensive. That's why they love university research.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Because we'll put the hundreds of millions of dollars into it, and then they.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it's I think I
appreciate this dialogue. This is really augmented the internal conversations we've had.
Yeah. I think as the year goes along, you'll see Autumn get a little more aggressive. I mean, really, there's no point in dying on the sword right now when we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But once we know what the outcome is going to be, and like Dave said, HR3 is sitting out there. There's going to be a discussion about what this likely means for higher ed. It's not great.
Jeez.
So you can have all the Endless Frontiers Act you want, but it's not going to generate the outcomes that they expect, because they, like Dave said, they broke the chain at the first link.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy.
And I'm a positive person.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for leading this discussion. We're getting close to 3 o'clock, and our tradition is to stop exactly at 3 o'clock, but I want to thank Mark, and it's great to get an update on all the great things you have been doing and your university in this regard. And thanks for all the peer-to-peer and folks asking questions, jumping in. A reminder, October 15th, Leah had to jump off, but Leah Burton is going to be moderating a session from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on winning the war for talent and technology. We're probably not going to get into the Bayh-Dole Act, but it's really about place-based corporate research relationships with universities through residing in research parks and innovation districts. How do we help facilitate that through university career centers, university research offices, and corporate and relations officers for that. And then reminder, November 2nd to the 6th, we have our international conference, including a discussion, a robust discussion on Bayh-Dole, and with the head of bio, Steve Case from Rise of the Rest, and a lot of other great speakers. So if you don't know about it, Vicki, Diana, or myself would be glad to talk to you about it. If you know sponsors who want to be involved, let us know. And with that, Vicki or Diana, our next peer-to-peer, we're not doing it on October 14th because we have our webinar on October 15th, correct?
Yes, we have the War for Talent on October 15th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern time. This is $75 for any AURP member. You can sign up online. We just figured that since if anyone who usually goes to the peer-to-peer, you'd be very interested in the War for Talent webinar. So it'll be a very, we're just kind of combining the two that week.
And then the next peer-to-peer will be when? October, 2 weeks after October 14th, I guess.
Looking at the calendar, it'll be October 28th.
28th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I guess. So thank you all. Thanks, Mark. Let us know how we can help, and have a good rest of the day.